mean?
The distance from 0.
Right? The distance a number is from 0. Distance is always positive. So it makes a number, whether it's negative or positive, always become positive. Right? So would it then make sense if we are graphing a line that if a line is getting closer and closer and closer to a negative number, what eventually will happen with a negative number?
It'll go.
Yep, it's going to bend that line back up.
Pretty cool.
Right? Because the absolute value of 9 is 9. The absolute value of 8 is 8. Of 7 is 7. Of 5 is 5. Of 2 is 2. Of negative 1, though, is then positive 1. And we start going the other direction. Okay, so in an absolute value equation, we have the general form y equals a times the absolute value of x minus h plus k. Okay, this h and k are new variables to us. However, they're going to function very similar to things we already know. This a in front is basically telling us the slope. However, slope tells us how steep a line is all the way across, and we now have a V-shaped line, so we got like kind of two different slopes going on at the same time, so we can't technically use the letter N. So we're going to use the letter A, which tells us the slope. But absolute value, right, the absolute value of 4 is 4, and the absolute value of negative 4 is 4. So we have to consider this as a negative and as a positive. H and K are going to be used to give us the starting point. So just like point slope form, it's telling us that original point to plot, but we're labeling it slightly different because in absolute value we have this V shape, and that point that it makes at the very bottom or the very top we call a vertex in the math world. And in the math world, when something is a vertex, we give it the letters H, comma, K. It's a little bit more special than just any random point, right? In point slope form, we kind of just found any random point on the graph. This is finding a very specific point that we call a vertex. Now, if we look in this general form, there is a subtraction sign in front of this H, and we said we could read that as subtraction. We could read it as a negative, or we could read it as what? Opposite, which means we are going to have to use the opposite sign of H. Okay, and just like we already agreed to, absolute values make a V-shaped graph. So anytime you are graphing with absolute value, you should have a V-shaped graph. So the idea of absolute value actually works almost exactly the same as graphing in point slope form. Right? In point slope form, we needed a point and we needed a slope. Okay, so it's a very similar idea to what we're looking at today. If we have y equals a times x minus h plus k as our general form, what number is going to represent our a? 2. And we said 2 is going to function like our slope. Okay, so we're kind of talking about our slope here, just with a positive and a negative. Okay, then we also need our starting point. Yeah. Is yours, you can come in. Guys, is this one up here from the one that was plugged in the back of the room?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sitting right there on my desk. Okay, so the starting point, you're welcome, is going to be our H, comma, K. So what number is sitting in the H position? 3. it looks negative, so we are going to write it as a positive. And what number is in the k position? 1. We do not take the opposite sign of k because it did not have an opposite in the formula. So from this information, what can we do something with? We can plot a point. So let's plot the point 3, 1. Once we have a plot pointed, what else can we then do?
Slope.
We can consider a slope. So how do we consider a slope of 2? So from this point, we're going to go up 2 over 1, just like we've been doing. But I don't want to draw a line in here. Because we all already agreed that this doesn't make a line, right? It makes a V. So this is going to give us one side of our V. So it's actually a ray. Have we heard that word before? To get the other side of our V, we're just going to do a mirror image of that. So instead of going up to right 1, I'm going to go up to left 1. Okay, so I'm graphing this as 2 over 1, and I'm graphing it as 2 over negative 1. And that's my shape. That's my graph. How do I feel about that one? I mean, that's not that much new information, right? This is very similar to point slope form. So let's look at our second one over here. What's our A equal? Negative 3. What's our starting point going to be? Negative 2. Do we agree with negative 2?
Yes.
Is it going to be a negative 3 or a positive 3? A negative 3, right? Because there's not a negative in the formula. There's not an opposite in the formula. Now what am I going to do? Plot negative 2, negative 3. Negative 2, negative 3. Now what?
You graph that, then you do slope, which is negative 3, 1.
So how do I do that, Cade?
You go down 3 over 1.
Down 3, right 1. Down 3, right 1.
And then you go down 3 left 1.
And then I'll go down 3, left 1 to get the other side of my V.